They called me Papa Hank at the foundation. For 10 years, my life was the whir of wheelchair motors and the sound of children laughing. I thought my legacy was secure in my son's hands. I was wrong. My name is Henry. But to the 327 kids at Bright Horizons Mobility Foundation, I was Papa Hank. I'm 68 years old, and on what should have been the proudest night of my life, the night we raised a record $300,000 at our annual Roll for Hope Gala, my entire world was hollowed out. My own son, the foundation's treasurer, stood at that podium, smiling for the cameras, accepting applause for the money he'd already stolen. He leaned over later, champagne in hand, and whispered, "Relax, Dad. It's just numbers on a screen. I'll triple it." I went from being a founder to a fool in the seconds it took that digital currency to transfer. I'm going to tell you how my boy traded wheelchairs for Bitcoin, and how I watched the light leave the eyes of parents who trusted us. But I didn't call the police. I didn't sue. What I did was quieter and far more permanent. I took the last thing I owned, my future, and I turned it into a cage around his. Before I tell you how I used every last cent of my retirement to bury his empire, tell me in the comments, are you a parent, a grandparent? Because you'll understand why I did what I did next. To every one of you who has stood up for someone who couldn't, thank you. Your strength is my strength. And if you're new here, do an old man a solid, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell. You're about to see why you never, ever corner a man who has nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. Now, let me tell you how I evicted my own son with a single signature. The foundation was never the plan. The plan was a consulting firm, a comfortable retirement, golf on Tuesdays. The blueprint for my entire life changed with a single smile. My daughter, Chloe. She had a smile that could light up a room that wasn't even built yet. She was born with spina bifida. The doctors gave us a list of things she'd never do. Chloe, she made her own list. Hers was better. Her 10th birthday, she wanted to go camping. We rigged up a special all-terrain wheelchair, got her to the top of this little ridge as the sun was setting. She looked out over those trees, that orange sky, and she smiled. Not a happy smile. A peaceful one. Like she'd just understood a secret of the universe. She turned to me and said, "Every kid should get to see this, Dad." That was the blueprint. That smile. That sentence. That's why Bright Horizons started in my garage 2 years later. Not as a charity, but as a promise. We'd get kids out of clinical rooms and into the world. Adaptive sports, wilderness trips, art programs where the only disability was a lack of imagination. For 18 years, that's what my life was. The smell of pine needles and acrylic paint, the sound of gears on a bike trail, the vibration of a wheelchair basketball game thrumming through the gym floor. I traded stock portfolios for grant applications. I didn't build a business. I built a harbor, a safe place. My son, Grant, he was always watching from the shore. Brilliant, analytical. Where Chloe felt everything, Grant understood systems. When he graduated top of his class in fintech, I was so proud. When he came to me at 30, saying he wanted to streamline the foundation's financial architecture, to make it sustainable for the long haul, I felt a deep, settling relief. My legacy would be secure. My practical son would safeguard my heart's work. I should have known. The most dangerous wolves don't look like predators. They look like shepherds. The first crack was small, a $12,000 line item in a quarterly report labeled Asset Liquidity Protocol. I asked about it. Grant leaned back in his fancy ergonomic chair, already so different from our donated office furniture, and sighed, a teacher with a slow student. "It's a temporary reallocation, Dad. Fiat currency is dying. We're moving into digital assets to hedge against inflation. It's basic modern portfolio theory." Words designed like a maze. Words to make a man who still balanced his checkbook with a pen feel ancient. I let it go. He was the expert. I was just Papa Hank, the guy who told stories and fixed wheelchair tires. Then, 3 months ago, Our program coordinator, Maya, came into my office. Her eyes were red. "Henry," she said, her voice thin as paper. "The check for the Lakeview summer camp. It bounced. The resort is canceling. 23 kids just lost their week." The floor dropped out from under me. That camp was Chloe's favorite. We'd spread some of her ashes there under the old oak by the lake. I went to find Grant. I found the first irregularity instead. A spreadsheet left open on a computer. Columns of numbers, transfers to an entity called Nexus Flow Ventures. A memo line that simply read, "Seed." It was $47,000. I confronted him that night. He looked me straight in the eye. He has his mother's eyes, kind and steady, and said, "It's a strategic partnership, Dad. They're developing blockchain tools for nonprofits. We're getting in on the ground floor." He believed it. Or he was so good at lying he'd even convinced himself. That's the moment I should have picked up the phone. Called the board, called the police. But all I could see was Chloe's peaceful smile. And I did nothing. Grant had a gift for making doubt feel like my own personal failure. My ignorance, a clumsy burden. After the $47,000, the discrepancies grew bolder. $80,000 for infrastructure tokenization. $65,000 for a smart contract audit. Each time, a new flood of jargon. Decentralized ledger. Off-ramp liquidity. He'd talk with this fervent light in his eyes, a missionary preaching the gospel of the future. A future where my life's work was just legacy code. Outdated, I started carrying a notebook. I'd write down the terms he used, look them up at night in the dim glow of my home computer. The definitions never matched what he was doing. It was like he'd built his own language, a dialect of deception only he was fluent in. The foundation began to starve from the inside. We postponed equipment repairs. The new van with the wheelchair lift? Canceled. The music therapy program? Scaled back to once a month. Parents would call, their voices tight with a panic I knew too well. "Is the swim program still running?" "Will there be scholarships this fall?" I'd stammer. "We're restructuring." And taste the lie like acid. I had to know. I hired a forensic accountant, a severe woman named Rita who wore no-nonsense glasses and had a voice like a file scraping rust. I paid her from my personal savings. I didn't tell my wife, Eleanor. When the report came, it wasn't a piece of paper, it was a verdict, $287,000. Siphoned over 14 months, not to a partnership, to an exchange, then to a wallet, then to a platform where he was trading leveraged futures on volatile cryptocurrencies. Rita pointed to a line graph on the last page. "This peak here," she said, her finger tapping a sharp spike, "that was 2 days after your Roll for Hope gala. He moved the entire $300,000 donation in one transaction." The night of the gala. I remember his speech, how moving it was, how the donors cried. He'd been standing up there, painting a vision of new wheelchair-accessible trails, while the money for those very trails was already vaporizing into digital ether. I drove to his apartment in the sleek, soulless part of the city. He lived in a tower of glass, a monument to cold ambition. The contrast to our foundation's warm, slightly shabby office, with kids' drawings taped to the walls, was a physical ache. He answered the door, holding a crystal tumbler of something amber. "Dad, what's wrong?" I didn't shout. My voice was ash. "The $300,000 from the gala. Where is it?" He didn't flinch. He took a sip, gestured me inside to the sterile white couch. "It's being positioned," he said. "We're at the cusp of a market cycle. That money isn't sitting in a dying bank account losing value. It's working." "Working for who, Grant? The kids at Lakeview just lost their camp." A flicker of annoyance, fast as a snake's tongue. "Sentimental costs are bankrupting us, Dad. You run on emotion. That's not sustainable. My model creates exponential growth. We help more kids in the long run." "Your model is theft." The words finally burst out of me. He set his glass down with a sharp click, looked at me with a pity so profound it was worse than hatred. You don't understand the first thing about the modern world. You're building sandcastles and the tide is made of code. It's just numbers moving between accounts. Digital shadows. He leaned forward, the champagne-fueled confidence from the gala still on him. I'll triple it by Q4. You'll see. Then you can build 10 camps. I stood up. I looked at my son, this stranger of my own making, and I understood. He didn't see children. He saw data points. He didn't see a betrayal. He saw a suboptimal allocation. The chasm between us wasn't generational. It was human. I walked out. I didn't say another word. What I didn't tell him was that Rita had found one more thing. A shell company. Nexus Flow Ventures wasn't just a trading account. It was his startup. He'd used our stolen money, the money donated for disabled children, as the seed funding for his own tech empire. The pitch deck even had a tagline, "Building the Future Ethically." I had all the proof. I had the moral right, but as I drove home in the dark, the hollow pit in my stomach wasn't filled with thoughts of police or lawsuits. It was filled with a colder, quieter question. What does a man do when justice isn't enough? When he doesn't just want his son punished, he wants him to understand. I couldn't tell Eleanor, not yet. To say the words aloud would be to make them real in a way that could shatter what was left of us. We'd already lost Chloe, the sudden infection 5 years ago that her body, worn out from a lifetime of battles, just couldn't fight. The foundation was the rope bridge we'd built over that canyon of grief. We held on to it and to each other, and we inched forward. If I told her Grant had set fire to that bridge, I wasn't sure she'd survive the fall. So I lied. I told her we were having cash flow issues, that Grant was restructuring. I started working later, using my own dwindling retirement funds to quietly cover the most urgent gaps. A therapist's bill here, a van repair there. I was a man trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teacup. Eleanor knew. A marriage that has weathered the worst storm knows the barometric pressure of a lie. She'd look at me over her evening tea, her eyes, the same steady eyes Grant had inherited, searching my face. The silence in our house stopped being comfortable. It became a third presence, thick and listening. One Wednesday night, she broke it. The click of her mug on the table was like a starting pistol. "Henry," she said. Her voice was terribly calm. "Is Grant stealing from the foundation?" The directness winded me. I opened my mouth, the automatic denial ready. But I saw her, really saw her. The new lines of worry around her mouth, the way she held her shoulders, braced for impact. She'd already asked herself the question and answered it. She was just giving me one last chance to be her partner. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had held Chloe, that had built ramps, that now felt useless. "Yes," I whispered. The word was so small it almost disappeared. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She folded her napkin into a precise, smaller square. "How much?" "Almost 300,000. A sharp intake of breath. Then, "And the gala money?" "Gone. Into his company." She nodded as if confirming a dreaded diagnosis. "What are you going to do?" This was the moment to tell her about Rita's report, about the police, about lawsuits and criminal charges. But another image flashed in my mind. Not of Grant in handcuffs, but of Eleanor in a courtroom gallery, watching her son be branded a felon for stealing from his dead sister's memory, watching the last of our family be dismantled in public. "I'm handling it," I said, the lie sour on my tongue. "Handling it." She repeated the words, tasting their emptiness. "By giving him more of our money to cover his tracks? It's for the kids, Ellie. I can't let them down." She stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "We already lost one child, Henry. I can't watch you lose yourself trying to save another one who doesn't want to be saved." Her voice cracked on the last word. "And I can't watch you lie to me. Not about this." She didn't go to bed. She walked out the back door into the garden Chloe had loved. I watched from the window as she stood in the dark, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the stone bench with Chloe's name on it. She slept in the guest room that night. She's been sleeping there ever since. This was the moment everything changed, and right now, I need you to change something for me. Tap subscribe and hit the bell. We're building a community of 500 people who believe in real stories about real consequences. Your subscription fuels this channel. Help us get there. Don't miss what happens next. The greatest pain wasn't Grant's theft. It was the distance now measured in the quiet hallway between our bedrooms. It was knowing I was protecting a monument to our daughter by destroying the living bond with my wife. And in that silent space, a new, dark thought began to take root. Not of exposure, but of architecture. If I couldn't salvage the family, I could at least build a consequence so perfect, so inescapable, that Grant would have to live inside it every single day. I just needed the right blueprint. And as it turned out, the city planning office had just published theirs. I couldn't trust my own eyes anymore. Grief, I realized, is a form of blindness. It makes you see ghosts in good intentions and mirages of loyalty where there's only desert. I needed someone who saw in facts. I needed Julian. Julian was ex-intelligence, though he never said which branch. He ran a discreet risk mitigation consultancy from a bland office above a tailor shop. He was in his late 50s, with the calm, worn face of a man who'd seen every flavor of human deceit and found them all equally bland. I paid him $20,000, the last of my personal brokerage account. I didn't tell Eleanor. "You want me to find the money or find the man?" he'd asked, his voice a dry monotone. "I know where the money went. I need to know what he's building with it. I need to see the blueprint." A slight nod. Context for consequence. Yes. What Julian unearthed in 3 weeks was more corrosive than theft. Nexus Flow Ventures was real. It was a crypto platform pitched as democratizing philanthropy. The irony was a bullet to the chest, but the prospectus was a work of artful manipulation. It touted proprietary blockchain solutions to ensure 95% of donations reach end users, cutting out bloated administrative costs. It used phrases like legacy charities and sentimental overhead. It was a direct, brutal critique of everything I'd built. Then, on page 14, I saw it, the social proof section, a testimonial quote. "As the parent of a child with unique abilities, I've seen how traditional models fail. Nexus Flow represents the future of real help." It was attributed to H.G., founder, Bright Horizons. He'd forged my endorsement. But below the quote was the image. It was Chloe, my Chloe. A photo I'd taken on that camping trip, her peaceful smile aimed at the horizon. It had been cropped, color-enhanced, made to look like a stock image of inspiration. Below it, the caption, "Empowering every potential." I felt the room tilt. Julian, watching my reaction, slid another file across the desk. It was a shareholder list. Grant held 45%. The other 55% was held by a VC firm, Ether Capital. The founding partner was Yeliana Reed, Yoon, Grant's first serious college girlfriend, the one Eleanor and I thought he'd marry before he decided she wasn't ambitious enough. Apparently, she'd become plenty ambitious. The Gala funds were converted to Ethereum and used as the initial capital proof to secure Ether's matching investment, Julian said, as if reading a grocery list. "Your son is the public face. Reed is the engine. Their launch party is scheduled for the 18th at their new offices in the Innovation District." He paused. "I have the bank records, the chain of custody for the crypto, the falsified documents. It's enough for the Attorney General, the IRS, and a civil suit that would peel the skin off both of them." He finally looked at me, his gaze neutral. "Do you want me to compile a package for the authorities?" The question hung in the air. I stared at Chloe's stolen smile. I thought of the police, the handcuffs, the headlines. The total, irreparable demolition of my son's life. The final, spectacular failure of my fatherhood displayed for the world. "No," I heard myself say. The word was quiet, final. Julian didn't react. "May I ask, why?" I couldn't articulate the storm inside me, the rage that wanted a ruin, not a reckoning, the grief that wanted him to feel, the cost, not just be billed for it. "Justice isn't the right shape," I said lamely. Julian gave a slow, almost imperceptible blink. "Then what is?" I looked back at the glossy prospectus, at the artist's rendering of the Nexus Flow office, a sleek glass cube in a burgeoning tech corridor. I thought of land, of foundations, of things that are permanent. "I need a different kind of map," I said. Julian left with a substantial bonus for his discretion. I sat alone with the file. I wasn't holding evidence for a trial. I was holding an architectural schematic. And I knew, with cold certainty, that to destroy a monument built on sand, you don't yell at it. You simply redirect the tide. My campaign was waged in whispers and paperwork. The city's new urban development plan was public record. The Innovation District, where Grant's glass cube sat, was Phase 1. But Phase 2, slated to begin in 18 months, was a massive expansion of the Central Children's Hospital, just 3 blocks to the east. The corridor between them was a jigsaw puzzle of aging warehouses, small auto shops, and vacant lots, a buffer zone of forgotten property. I became a student of dirt. I used shell LLCs with names like Horizon Holdings and Legacy Properties, set up with Julian's discreet help. Mara, my baffled but compliant realtor, would call, her voice laced with professional concern. "Henry, the lot on 5th and Mercer. It's a former gas station. The environmental remediation alone. And the asking price is absurd." "Buy it," I'd say. "But the value is not the point, Mara. Just buy it." I liquidated our world, the 401k. Eleanor didn't know I still contributed to. The bonds her father left us. The small portfolio of blue-chip stocks that was our rainy day fund. The sun wasn't just shining, it was scorching the earth. I sold my vintage Corvette, the one frivolous joy I'd kept from my old life, to a collector for a heart-stopping sum. Every dollar, every cent of our shared financial history, I converted into parcels of neglected earth. I was a ghost, haunting county clerk offices, signing documents in anonymous conference rooms. The weight of it was a physical thing, a constant pressure behind my eyes. I was gambling Eleanor's future, our security, the very roof over our heads, on a geometric hunch. One night, I spread the property maps across our dining table, the table where we'd once celebrated birthdays, where Chloe had painted. My mosaic of vengeance. I'd done it. I owned the entire eastern flank of the Innovation District. Every possible route from the hospital's planned new surgical wing to the main arterial road ran through land that belonged to me. Eleanor found me there. She stood in the doorway, her robe tied tightly, her face pale in the low light. She didn't ask about the maps. Her eyes went to the empty space in the garage visible through the window where the Corvette had been. "You sold it," she said, not a question. "I needed the capital." "For the foundation?" Her voice was hollow, already knowing the answer. I couldn't lie anymore. "For a different kind of foundation." She looked at the maps, at the highlighted zones, the technical markings. She was a smart woman. She'd been a city planner before Chloe was born. She understood zoning, easements, municipal expansion. Her eyes traced the lines from the hospital plot to Grant's office address. The blood drained from her face. "Henry, what have you done?" "What he forced me to do." She walked to the table, placed a trembling hand on the map, right over the plot where Grant's building stood. "This isn't justice. This is a siege. You're not punishing a thief. You're orchestrating the ruin of your son." "He orchestrated his own." The words tore out of me, too loud in the sleeping house. "He took from kids who can't walk, Ellie. He used Chloe's face to do it. What would you have me do? Send him a strongly worded letter? Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of fury. I would have you be his father, not this cold strategist. You're becoming a reflection of his worst impulses. She gripped the edge of the table. You're using every memory we have, every dollar we saved, every piece of our life together as a weapon. When this is over, what's left for us? She left me standing there, surrounded by the paper evidence of my obsession. Her question echoed in the silence. I had no answer. The map was complete. The trap was built. All that was left was to wait for the prey to walk into the clearing. The next morning, Mara called, her voice no longer confused but edged with awe. Henry, the Children's Hospital Board just announced their expansion. They're moving up the timeline. They need to break ground in 6 months to secure a federal grant. I closed my eyes. The first domino had tipped. Right on schedule. The meeting with the hospital's expansion director, Dr. Eris Thorne, was held in a sunny, hopeful conference room decorated with children's drawings. It felt like a violation to bring my dark purpose into that light. Dr. Thorne, a man with kind eyes and a brisk efficiency, spread his own architectural plans next to my property maps. Mr. Grant, your offer is extraordinary, he said, shaking his head. Selling us 9 contiguous parcels at 40% below assessed value? It's the answer to a prayer. But I have to ask, why? I had my lie ready, a philanthropic gesture in my daughter's memory, a desire to see the land used for healing. The words felt like ashes in my mouth, but I spoke them convincingly. I was becoming scarily good at deception. There is one condition, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. The timeline. My offer is contingent on the project breaking ground within 6 months. My own estate planning requires it. Dr. Thorne nodded, understanding nothing. The grant mandate. It's perfect synergy. You have my word. We shook hands. The deal, the linchpin of my entire design, was struck. The hospital would need immediate, unimpeded access for construction vehicles, and later, for emergency ambulances to their new state-of-the-art trauma center. The only viable access route cut directly past the front entrance of Nexus Flow. I drove home, a hollow victor. I expected to find Eleanor at the kitchen table, waiting. Instead, I found her laptop open on the couch, the screen glowing. She was in the shower. On the screen was her email, open to a flight confirmation. A one-way ticket to Portland, to her sister's. Departure next Friday. And next to the laptop, printed out, was a county notice. A public hearing notice for zoning variance, access easement. It had my shell company's name on it. She'd been researching. She'd connected every dot. She walked out drying her hair and saw me standing there. She didn't startle. She just looked tired, defeated. You're leaving, I said, the words raw. You left months ago, Henry. You just kept your body here. She nodded at the notice. So this is the master stroke? You strangle his business with a zoning law? They'll need a 24/7 emergency access easement. It will void his street front lease. His investors will flee. And you'll have your pound of flesh. She dropped the towel. Did you ever stop to think what happens after? To him? To you? To me, while you're busy being the god of consequences? What was the alternative, Ellie? Tell me. You wanted me to be his father. A father stops a child from running into traffic, even if he has to knock him down to do it. That's what this is. No, she shouted, a sound of pure anguish. A father holds the child's hand. You didn't try to hold his hand, Henry. You just went and bought the traffic. She sank onto the couch, the fight gone. You're so focused on making him see what he lost. You don't see what you're losing right now. Us. You're sacrificing us on this altar you've built. I had no defense, because she was right. In my quest to make Grant feel the cost of Chloe's memory, I'd made our shared, living love the currency. Don't go, I whispered a plea. She looked at the flight confirmation on the screen, then back at me, her eyes filled with a heartbreaking mix of love and farewell. I can't watch the end of this story, Henry. I can't be in the audience when you break our son. And I can't be the wife of the man who would do it. Love shouldn't be this surgical. The sound of the shower still dripping in the other room was the loudest sound in the world. She left the next morning, not to Portland, but to a hotel. She said she needed space to breathe. The house became a museum of our life together, every object a silent accusation. The final piece was in motion. My revenge had a price tag, and I was finally adding it up. It was the quiet of an empty house and the terrifying thought that I might have won the battle only to find myself standing alone in the ruins. The city hearing was a dry, bureaucratic affair. My shell company's lawyer, a sharp woman I'd never met in person, presented the case for the critical access easement. Nexus flow. His lawyer objected, citing leaseholder rights and economic disruption. He was slick, expensive, probably paid for by Ether Capital. I sat in the back of the chamber, a spectator in my own play. Grant was there, at the front, with Sienna Reed. She was all sharp angles and confident nods. He looked thinner, older than he should. He kept glancing at the door as if willing a miracle. The city planner testified about emergency response times. The fire chief spoke about life-saving minutes. It was a clinical dismantling. The vote was unanimous. The easement was granted. The hospital's construction would permanently close the street-side drop-off and parking that gave Nexus Flow its premier address. After the gavel fell, I watched them. Sienna Reed gathered her things with violent, precise movements, not looking at Grant. She strode out, already on her phone. Grant just sat there, staring at the empty chair where the planner had been. I waited until the room cleared. I walked over and sat beside him. The smell of his cologne was the same. It was the most disorienting thing. He didn't look at me. "Was it you?" he asked, his voice flat. "The anonymous land buyer." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you used a wheelchair as a stepping stone, Grant. You don't get to do that and just walk away." He finally turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears, but from exhaustion. "You bankrupted me. The investors are pulling out. The lease is void. Sienna is dissolving the partnership. I'm personally liable for 18 months of rent on a space that's about to become a construction site." I felt no surge of triumph, just a deep, cold stillness. "That sounds like a cash flow problem. You should try moving some numbers between accounts." He flinched as if struck. Good. Let him feel the sting of his own words. "You could have just turned me in," he said, a last flicker of defiance. "This was cruel." "The police would have given you a case number," I said quietly, standing up. "This gives you a view. Every day you'll get to look out your window, for as long as you can afford the rent, and watch them build a hospital for sick children on the land your father bought. You'll know exactly what the cost of your ambition was. You wanted to build the future? Now you get to watch the one that matters being built, and know you're not a part of it." I left him there. The victory was absolute. It was also ashes. A week later, the construction fencing went up. The great groaning machinery of progress rolled onto my land. Grant's shiny employees stopped coming to work. The Nexus Flow logo looked cheap and lonely behind the chain link. I got the call from Dr. Thorne. "Mr. Grant, we're starting the foundation pour on Parcel B tomorrow. We'd be honored if you'd join us. We'd like to name the new ambulatory wing after your daughter, the Chloe Grant Wing." I stood in my silent kitchen, the phone to my ear, watching a single leaf fall from the maple tree in our empty backyard. I had done it. I had weaponized my grief and my money into a perfect poetic justice. I had saved the hospital money. I had given Chloe's name to a place of healing, and I had never felt more like a ghost. The first concrete was poured the next morning. I didn't go. I sat at home listening to the distant rumble of trucks. My phone buzzed. It wasn't Eleanor. It wasn't Grant. It was an alert from my bank. A deposit. $50,000. From an anonymous source. The memo line read, "For the Lakeview Camp, a former investor." I stared at it, the ashes in my mouth stirring. The game wasn't over. Someone else had just moved a piece, and for the first time, I wondered if the cage I'd built had more than one door. The $50,000 sat in the foundation's account like a ghost. A former investor. It could only be one person, Sienna Reed. It wasn't an apology. It was a transaction, a severance payment for her conscience. I didn't touch it. I left it there, a digital monument to the absurdity of it all. 3 days later, at 2:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. A jarring, insistent sound in the tomb-quiet house. Through the peephole, distorted by the fisheye lens, was Grant. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, standing in the drizzle without a jacket. He looked like a lost boy, not a disgraced tech founder. I opened the door. The cool, damp air rushed in. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there, shivering. "She cleaned out the corporate accounts," he said, his voice ragged. "Left just enough to cover the next payroll, then closed the entity. The investors are suing me for misrepresentation, personal liability." He gave a short, brittle laugh that was mostly a choke. Turns out, digital shadows can still cast very real subpoenas. I didn't say anything. I just held the door open, a silent invitation. He walked in, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood. He went to the living room but didn't sit. He stood before the mantel looking at the pictures. Chloe as a baby. Our family at the beach, Grant maybe 10, building a sandcastle with a scowl of intense concentration. A photo of him graduating MIT, beaming with a pride I now questioned. "I'm sorry about the photo," he said, his back to me. "Using Chloe's picture. That was her idea, Sienna's. I said it was too much. She said it was effective narrative leverage." He turned around and his face was a mask of pure exhaustion. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway. It wasn't the apology I'd wanted. It was a confession to a lesser crime. The fury I'd been nursing for months began to curdle into something else, something colder and sadder. "Is that the only thing you're sorry about, Grant? The photo?" He finally looked at me and his eyes held a hollowed-out honesty that was worse than any lie. "Do you remember when Chloe got that infection?" The question was a physical blow. Of course I remember. I was there, the night before she went to the hospital for the last time. You and Mom were asleep in the chair in her room. I was sitting with her. She was in so much pain, but she was trying to be brave for you. She held my hand and she whispered, "Don't let them forget me, Grant." His voice broke, and I promised her I wouldn't. He wiped his face with a wet sleeve. Then she died, and you built a whole universe to remember her. Camps, foundations, scholarships. You turned her into a saint, a logo, a mission statement. And I was just the other kid, the one who couldn't fix anything, the one whose hands were empty. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I saw my grief from a terrifying new angle, as a monolith that had cast my living son into shadow. "So you stole from her foundation?" I asked, the disbelief leaching the heat from my words. "No," he shouted, then lowered his voice, trembling. "I wanted to build something bigger, something that wasn't just a memorial, but a system, a machine for good that didn't run on guilt and charity galas. I thought if I could make it huge, if I could put her name on something revolutionary, then I'd finally be keeping my promise. I'd be the one who made sure she wasn't forgotten." He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "But it's just numbers on a screen. You were right. I got lost in the code. I thought the ends justified the liquidity reallocation." He spat the jargon like a poison. Sienna saw a mark. The investors saw a trend. And I just saw a way to finally be the architect instead of the guy visiting the monument. The silence that followed was different from the silence with Eleanor. This was filled with the awful sound of understanding. "The hospital," he said, looking up. "The wing named for her. That's your move, isn't it?" I nodded. A sad, almost admiring smile touched his lips. "You always were better at building real things." He stood up. "I'm going to lose the apartment. I'll figure it out. I needed you to know. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money." He walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Dad. The cage you built? It's the first honest thing I've had to face in years." He left, melting back into the drizzle. I closed the door and leaned against it. The architecture of my revenge, so clever and perfect, now felt grotesque. I hadn't been punishing a thief. I'd been laying siege to a boy trying to outrun his sister's ghost, and the victory, now that I saw its true shape, tasted like dust. Eleanor came back a week later, not to stay, but to talk. She found me in the backyard, staring at Chloe's bench. She sat beside me, the space between us charged with 1,000 unsaid things. "I saw him," she said quietly. "Grant. He came to my sister's. He told me everything. The photo. His reasoning." She let out a long breath. "He's a mess, but he's our mess." "What do we do, Ellie?" The question felt like the first honest one I'd asked in a year. "We salvage," she said, her voice firm with a resolve I'd missed. "Not him, not yet. The foundation. The kids." She turned to me. "I met with Maya. The staff is still there. The families are still waiting. We have the $50,000 from that woman. We have a name that still means something in this community. We can restart. Smaller, smarter. No more CFOs, just us." Hope, a fragile and frightening feeling, flickered in my chest. "What about Grant?" Her expression tightened. "That's the condition. He doesn't get a job. He doesn't get a title. He faces them. The families. The parents whose kids' programs he canceled. He looks them in the eye and he tells them what he did. No jargon. No excuses." It was a punishment far worse than any I'd devised, more terrifying than any lawsuit. It was emotional nakedness before the people he'd most wronged. I called him. He agreed without hesitation. That scared me most of all. We held the meeting in the Foundation's community room, the walls still adorned with the kids' bright, chaotic artwork. 20 parents came. The air was thick with anger and grief. Grant stood at the front, pale but steady. I stood in the back, near the door, a spectator again. He didn't read a statement. He just talked. He told them about the liquidity reallocation. He translated it. "I took money that was yours." He told them about the crypto scheme, calling it his arrogant delusion. He named the programs that were cut because of him. The Lakeview camp, the music therapy. He didn't mention Chloe. He didn't mention me. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Then a mother named Lena, whose nonverbal son had flourished in the canceled music program, stood up. Her face was a storm. "My boy cried for a week when he couldn't see his therapist," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You stole his voice twice." She picked up her paper coffee cup and threw it. It hit his chest, splattering brown drops across his white shirt. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, accepting it. Another parent stood, then another. They spoke of disappointment, of betrayal, of scrambling to find alternatives that didn't exist. Grant absorbed it all, his head bowed, his hands clenched at his sides. Then a man named David stood up. His teenage son, Marco, was a sports prodigy in his wheelchair, a kid Chloe had mentored. David wasn't angry. He looked sad. "My son," David said, looking at Grant. "He doesn't talk about the camp he missed. He asks about the volunteer who used to race him in the gym and let him win. He asks about Chloe." David's voice softened. "He says she was the only one who didn't talk to him like he was made of glass." He paused, letting the memory of my daughter fill the room, a gentle, haunting presence. "Whatever you stole, you can't steal that. And you can't fix this with a speech." Grant's composure shattered. A raw, ugly sob escaped him. He crumpled, folding in on himself right there in front of everyone, the weight of David's words, of Chloe's true legacy, finally crashing through the last of his defenses. No one went to comfort him. There was no absolution in that room, only the brutal, necessary chemistry of consequence. As I watched my son weep, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt, for the first time, that he was finally grieving the same person I was. We were just in different rooms, and maybe, just maybe, that was a place we could start from. 6 months is a long time, and no time at all. The foundation reopened. We called it Bright Horizons Next Chapter. It was humble. A part-time staff of 3, including Maya, who never gave up. We ran the adaptive basketball clinic and the weekend art workshop. We used the $50,000 to fund a tiny rolling music therapy van. It was enough. Grant got a job as a junior bookkeeper at a small manufacturing firm. He lived in a studio apartment that smelled of old carpet and takeout. Every month he sent a $500 money order to the foundation. The memo line always read, "Restitution." He came on Saturdays, not to manage but to move chairs, to wipe down tables, to hand out water bottles at the clinic. He didn't try to be a hero. He just showed up. Eleanor and I were in a delicate new orbit. We had dinner every Tuesday and Thursday. We talked about the foundation, the news, the garden. We didn't talk about the past year. It sat between us like a sleeping animal we were careful not to wake. We were learning each other again, 2 people weathered by the same storm but on different decks. Then the letter came from Dr. Thorne at the hospital. Formal, on heavy cream paper. They wanted to proceed with naming the new ambulatory wing the Chloe Grant Wing. A dedication ceremony was being planned. They wanted the family to speak. I showed the letter to Eleanor. She read it, her fingers tracing Chloe's name. "It's what you wanted, isn't it?" she asked gently. "I thought it was," I said. The hunger for that kind of permanent public memorial had fueled my every move. Now, the idea felt heavy, like another monument separating me from my living son. "Ask him," Eleanor said. I found Grant at the community center, sweeping the gym floor after the basketball clinic. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. He handed it back. "You should do it," he said. "I'm not sure I want to anymore." He leaned on the broom. "Why not?" "Because a wing of a building. It's just a thing. I think I spent so long building things for her. I forgot to just miss her. With you." He looked at the floor, then back at me, his eyes clear. "Do it. She'd want it. Kids will get better there. That's all she ever wanted." He paused. "Just maybe don't make the speech about how perfect she was. Make it about how she laughed when she beat you at cards, or how she got mad when I cheated. Make it about our screwed-up family that loved her. That's the real story." The dedication was last week. Eleanor stood on one side of me, Grant on the other. We didn't speak. We just stood together as they unveiled the small brass plaque. I didn't talk about saints or legacies. I told the story of a girl who loved bad puns and sunsets, and who thought every kid deserved a chance to see the view from the top of the ridge. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, a woman approached Grant. It was Lena, the mother who had thrown the coffee cup. She had her son with her in his wheelchair. She didn't say anything to Grant. She just nodded, once. A hard, brief, but unmistakable acknowledgement. Then she walked away. Grant watched her go, then turned and walked back into the hospital, saying he wanted to see the wing. I found him later, not in the new wing, but in the old children's rehab gym. He was on his knees, tying the shoe of a young boy struggling with the laces. The boy's mother watched, grateful. Grant said something, and the boy laughed. I stood in the doorway, unseen. The man who had traded wheelchairs for Bitcoin was here, on a linoleum floor, performing the smallest, most human act of service. No blockchain could record it. No ledger could quantify its value. this wasn't the redemption I had blueprinted. It was messier. It was incomplete. There were still silences at family dinners, and a restitution check would arrive next month, and the future was an uncertain shape. But as I watched him help that boy wheel out, retrieving a stray basketball and handing it back with a quiet word, I understood something. The foundation I'd meant to build was made of land and law and perfect, painful justice. But the one that mattered, the one that was slowly rising from the rubble, was built on harder things, on showing up, on tying shoes, on picking up the ball after the 17th missed shot. Maybe that's all redemption ever is. Not a grand unveiling, but the quiet, stubborn choice to keep playing the game, long after you've lost the right to be on the court. And just like that, a new foundation was poured, not just of concrete, but of conscience. If this story hooked you, here's your move. First, smash that subscribe button. It's free, and it feeds the algorithm that gets us to 500, our first big milestone as a truth-telling family. Thank you.